Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our live webinar with Red River today on how to get your organization remote workforce ready now. I'm Gary Utley, marketing specialist for Red River, joined with special guest Jason Waldrop, president of managed services for Red River. Today, we're going to be talking about a little bit of remote workforce and how to get ready for it. So some of the topics that we'll be discussing are getting started with virtual desktop, securing your devices while employees are remote, streamlining collaboration, as well as backing up your organization with the power of Azure. Today, we're hosting this webinar with Microsoft Teams live events, and we would love for your interaction throughout the presentation. By doing that, you can also jump onto the comments on our far right corner by clicking into it, asking any questions, and making sure that you add your name to it so we can actually respond directly back to you. We do have our expert, Brian Charles, on there, our subject matter expert, to be answering any questions throughout the presentation, and as well as be having about 15 minutes at the end to go over any prominent questions that multiple people will have. So I want to kick this webinar off a little bit about with the introduction of Jason Waldrop and asking him a few questions about this whole epidemic of how to get our kind of getting the organizations on a remote and modern workforce. So Jason, so the big topic is discussion is like, how do we modernize our organization's IT infrastructure while keeping our employees running remotely? Can you talk a little bit about what some of the customers and prospects have reached out to you directly, asking how do we get this started?
Sure, thanks, Gary. Yeah, so the phone has been ringing quite a bit. Obviously, during this scenario, it's kind of a weird, unplanned for deal, obviously. And for those of you who've been following us out there for the last couple of years, we've been evangelizing a digital transformation strategy, and a lot of it does revolve around Office 365 and some of the piece parts of that. So a lot of folks have been reaching out to me and asking, hey, I know we've gone maybe we haven't started that journey or we're somewhere down that path, but we own all this M365 or Office 365 licensing. It has a lot of capabilities. You guys have been telling us about that. Like, how can we get some of that going in a hurry? Because we've got this crazy COVID situation that we didn't plan for, and we'd like to get that stuff deployed. So I'll just kind of mention that, from a remote work perspective at Red River, we have a pretty broad portfolio, okay? Multi-vendor portfolio, whether it's Amazon or Nutanix, or you can go down the road. We have a lot of different ways to solve these problems, but today's webinar is really going to be fairly like Microsoft centric, Office 365 centric, because those are a lot of the calls we've been getting, right? Like I already own most of what I need. I need you guys to help me configure it and manage it for me. So we're going to kind of stay centered down that pathway, okay?
Nice. Well, following with that, you're talking about all the remote questions that you're getting. What are some of the pain points that a lot of customers are like they're not aware of or that they can face while kind of going into this transition?
Yeah, there's been a few kind of big themes there, Gary. One is VPN terminations. Okay, so I'll give you like just a real we have dozens of customers that have this, but one that I worked with specifically, about 1,000 user organization across, call it 7 or 8 sites around the country. Okay, and they do have they have cloud assets, but they also have a production data center that has some of their core financial assets and things like that. Okay, from an application perspective, and so they need VPNs to get into that from remote. Okay, and on any given day pre-COVID, right? Like their firewalls are sized for 250 VPN connections, which is more than sufficient for their workforce from a run rate work from home perspective. Okay, but like in this situation where we've now got 1,000 people working from home, clearly, 250 VPN connections is not enough, and that by itself is a problem. But the bigger problem is, it's not just like a software upgrade to deal with that, right? It's VPNs are hardware intensive, right? They're CPU clock intensive. So for this particular customer, for many customers in this situation, it's actually a hardware upgrade to those firewalls to make this happen. Well, guess what? We got supply chain issues. It's hard to get hardware. Not to mention we can't put engineers in the environment. So they're stuck. Okay, so the way to get around that is to build a virtual desktop environment in the cloud, or in this case, we're going to talk about Azure and Windows virtual desktops. Build it in Azure, create a single VPN connection from Azure to that customer's data center, and allow the 1,000 users to ride that. So that's one kind of big topic. is the VPN termination issue. Virtual desktops all by itself is a separate topic. I used the VPN example as one reason, but there's other reasons like poor performance for legacy applications or client server applications from a myriad of home user devices, right? We can solve that problem with virtual desktops. We've been spinning up a lot of virtual desktops to help solve point situations for clients. And then finally, identity management, right? Like folks, we've been beating the multi-factor authentication and single sign-on drum for many years, and it's one of those things. It's kind of sometimes easy. It's a pain in the neck to create some friction for users and stuff. So folks have kind of some folks have kicked that can. Now people are really kind of saying, boy, this is serious business. We need to get those things enabled. So all of those three are the big topics: identity, virtual desktop, and VPN termination.
Right. So those are more all three components of actually getting to the remote kind of the workforce and getting people set up to work, every day. Following that, so that kind of sets up for this next question that I have is that we know all of our customers are very unique. They have unique requests and individual environments. So do you have a kind of like a case study of a client that we've worked with to kind of set them up in a remote workforce area and kind of tell that little story?
Yeah, we've got a bunch of them. One that comes to mind, and it's a good one because there's a case study on the website so people can read about it if they'd like. But company here in the DC metro area called Deco. They're in the healthcare business, and we've been a partner with Deco for many years, helping them with their Cisco environment, their phone system, and Cisco network and stuff. And then in late 2018, early 2019, they picked us up to start managing their broader IT assets, data center, desktop, those things. So now we're kind of a bigger part of their IT operation. And as a result, they started to kind of take advantage of this digital transformation strategy that we were messaging, right? So the move to the cloud, secure identity management, all of those things. And so, if you look at that progression, right, kind of we were their Cisco guy, then we became their broader IT guy, and then their digital transformation partner. When this COVID situation happened, because they were well positioned, they were able to just send everybody home, not because they came into this thinking, hey, this is we're doing this to enable remote work, but it was part of just the modern work strategy, which means that folks are going to be anywhere on any device, and how do we deliver a secure, consistent experience there? So they were able to get home and just work like they always did, just not in an office environment. So big win for Deco, and we're really thrilled to have enabled that outcome for them.
Great, that's a good story, and seeing how we can just work with them all the way up to a point where they need like a disaster happens and they're already set up for success with us. So that sets up the kind of like the story and understanding of what we do as for the remote workforce assist. So Jason, I want you to hand it off to you for kind of going through the presentation to show how everybody can get started.
Okay, great. All right, cool guys. So the kind of the outline for the talk today is it is really about remote workforce enablement, right? So we're going to kind of frame that out at a high level, and we're going to talk about it in a couple of big themes. Okay, access, so securing how folks access the corporate IT environment, securing the devices from which our employees access the environment, and then securing the data they access, right? So those are the big three themes when you think about how we deal with a remote workforce: securing access, securing devices, and securing data. And once we've done that, we've kind of built a secure highway into the corporate IT environment. Then we can start to change the way we work and create a lot of productivity enhancements through collaboration on Microsoft Teams. So that's kind of how we step through this. All right. So if we look here, okay. Obviously current events can't be ignored. Okay, every single business everywhere is being impacted, right? And so, it's remote work, it's telework, it's telecommuting. It's time to dust off the business continuity strategy. That's Gary. One thing I forgot to mention earlier, a call I've been getting aside from just remote work is, hey, the board is putting a lot of pressure on us for business continuity planning, okay?
Right.
More than backup, right? So we've tucked some of that messaging into this presentation as well, all right?
Okay, great.
So what does this mean, all right? Again, for those of you who've been following us for a while, you've seen this messaging, okay? We no longer live in a world where IT hands you your your hardened laptop with 7 applications on it, and that's your business productivity device. Okay. Yes, we live in that world, but we also live in a world where those same applications are on your employees' iPads, they're on their Android devices, they're on their home Mac, their Windows 10 machine at home, and their 7th grader just helped them set up their Exchange account on the iPad, right? That's the world we live in, okay? And so whether we like it or not, as IT, it's actually, from the business's perspective, it's wonderful, right? Because it allows folks to be productive from anywhere. So for somebody who, like me, who coaches baseball with my 11-year-old boy, right? Like, it allows me to be on the field and be with him, but also be in touch with business. And that can be said for a whole host of situations, right? But from an IT perspective, we have to make sure that now that our precious corporate intellectual property is scattered across myriad devices in myriad environments, that we're securing that experience, delivering that productivity to that user, but making sure we can look at the business and say, hey, we're secure. It's cool. Don't worry. All right. So again, we come back to these 3 big themes. Again, today's talk about remote access. When we talk about remote access, it's really 3 big themes: securing that access. So we're going to dive deep on multi-factor authentication, what we call conditional access or inspected session risk, because in the cloud, not every session is created equal, and we'll get into that, okay? And then you heard me throw some virtual desktop use cases out there earlier. We'll double click on that, okay, as part of this, all right? Then we're going to look at securing the devices, okay? So whether it's corporate devices, bring your own device, or could be some third-party internet kiosk, how do we treat each of those situations, and how do we ensure that we're creating as secure of an experience from that device as we can? And then finally, the data itself, right? That Word document or that PowerPoint file or that proposal, that SharePoint library, whatever it is that the teams are accessing, how do we secure those files themselves and protect them against things like ransomware, protect folks from accidentally spilling, let's call it PHI or PI, or violating some sort of compliance issue, or just flat out, accidentally sending information out of the organization or copying information to a place they shouldn't. Okay, and then we'll wrap up in there some backup and disaster recovery, like I said, because that's a theme that we've been hearing left and right from really board driven from a lot of our customers. Okay, is that business continuity theme. Okay, so let's get into the first piece of this, securing access. All right, so in this cloud world that we live in, okay, if we think about how users are accessing corporate IT assets today, okay, so what does that mean? That means there's Gary right there, and Gary's in his home office, and Gary's trying to access, let's say, the time and expense application, okay, to put in his expenses for the month, right? Well, there are in the cloud, there are multiple versions of Gary, okay? So you've got Gary sitting, let's say you're in the corporate office, behind the corporate firewall, on the laptop that we just patched this morning, that we gave you yesterday, right? We know that that's and we know it's you because you gave us your thumbprint or whatever multi-factor. Like, that's a clean version of Gary. Go ahead and do whatever you want to do, okay? But there's also a version of Gary that is maybe on a machine that we've never seen before, okay? On an open web terminal in a coffee shop somewhere, trying to access a secure, like some of our most secure material, right? So we might treat that session differently. So think about the user. We know it's Gary because we've got the multi-factor authentication and all of that stuff, okay? But then the session risk, which you see here, so user risk and session risk, we have to balance that out because not all sessions are the same. There's context there that we need to consider. Okay, so let's look at what that looks like in some detail here. So if we move left to right on this diagram, we start with the identity itself. Here's Gary. We know it's Gary because he gave us his special code or his MFA. Okay, but then we're going to want to look, because again, we don't really know much more than, hey, that's just Gary right now. Okay, there's a lot of versions of Gary in the cloud, so we want to layer in some additional variables to make some assessment of this session and ultimately a call on whether we're going to allow it or not, or challenge it again or whatever, right? So one is location. So this is relevant for a number of reasons. It might be, hey, if Gary's in China, okay, a place that we know steals intellectual property and things like that, all right, we're going to maybe treat those sessions a little bit differently, okay? That's one scenario. There's a scenario of like an impossible travel situation. So let's say we saw Gary log in from Raleigh, North Carolina 2 hours ago, and all of a sudden 3 hours later he's logging in Seattle. We know that's not possible. That's an impossible travel situation. So somehow his credentials have been stolen or something's wrong with this session. So we're going to block that session, force a password reset or whatever it is. Okay, wipe the device. All right, so that's one. Then so location is one thing. The state of the device. Okay, so again, is it a corporate laptop that we just patched? Is it an iOS device that is enrolled in our mobile device management? Or is it some open web kiosk behind an internet anonymizer? We're going to treat each one of those things with different considerations. Okay, the user group that Gary belongs to, is Gary part of is he coming in as an IT admin with God access, or like maybe someone who works in the warehouse that has very little access to precious corporate information, right? So you balance all that against Microsoft's collective risk score. Okay, so this is their they have a whole cyber obviously infrastructure that's going to do things like dark web scans on these creds and a whole host of special sauce that they'll assign a risk score to this session. So when we mash all that together, user, location, device, and the risk score, we can then make some assessments about that session. Okay, so we can say, hey, we're going to allow it. We're going to maybe ask for another multi-factor authentication. We're going to make you go back and patch that device before you come through, or we're just going to block it. Okay, so this is what we think about when we think about identity management in the cloud. Okay, risk-based conditional access is kind of the vernacular, but think of it just as inspected session risk. All right, so that's access. So remember, we talked about securing access. Okay. Another piece of access that we talked about was virtual desktops. Virtual desktops solve a whole host of problems. We talked about the VPN termination point, that example earlier in this talk. We talked about legacy applications. So like that would be like fall into this specialized workload category on this slide. So maybe it's an old client server app that performs poorly from certain environments that we want to serve up in a special way through a virtual desktop. Okay. And virtual desktops have been used historically for all sorts of things, like in banking, for example, a lot of teller applications are served up over virtual desktop, or in a healthcare environment, practice management and EMR applications that doctors using an iPad for in the treatment room, that's often a virtual desktop. Middle of this slide is another great use case, like what we're talking about today, flexible or remote workforce. So whether it's summer interns, okay, where we suddenly have 50 new hires coming in for 3 months, we'd prefer to just provision them 50 virtual desktops and give them cheap hardware, and then flush those desktops 3 months from now. Then give them, then build out full imaged machines for them, right? Or contractors or remote work like this. Okay, so there's a number of use cases, and again, virtual desktop technology has been around for a while. I remember, God, 5-10 years ago, it was like going to be it was going to be the only way we were ever going to use computers again, right? And then we started deploying this stuff and realizing all kinds of weird things and hard things happen. It takes a lot of infrastructure. It's complex. Printing's a pain in the neck. All of this stuff. Okay. Well, the cloud has changed that. Okay. Period. It just has. The fact that we don't have to worry about a lot of that underlying IT and so the technology has just gotten a lot better. And we'll talk about that's kind of this best-in-class user experience we're talking about here. It's really changed the way we think about this. So, one from a really just classically good end user experience, the Windows Virtual Desktop that we serve up from Azure feels like a Windows 10 desktop. It looks like one. It's got a start button. We can even do things like if your home machine is already set up with printers that are direct attached or coming over the network, it will pick those printers up, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. You can print right from your virtual desktop. It's optimized for Teams and Office 365, so you can do full video conferencing and voice through it, and it works great. Okay, and with the FX Logic stuff, that's like, think of that as like roaming profiles that actually work. Okay, so there's a lot of technology advancements that have happened to make this actually a viable and just really feels like you're on a regular desktop. Okay. Of course, I'm not going to just kind of spend a ton of time on this slide, but like we all know that we are in an environment where moving assets to AWS, Azure, GCP is without question a better compliance and security posture in most cases than us trying to build that ourselves in our own data center, right? All of these hyperscale cloud providers have full teams that are doing nothing but worrying about this stuff all the time. So you benefit from all of that Azure Security Service stuff when we move you up here, okay? And then lastly, we manage this whole thing as Red River for the client now. We've got really sophisticated software overlay to manage things like auto scaling, because for what that means is, like, if you're an M365 customer today, if you have that license from Microsoft, you probably have most of what you need from an entitlements perspective to do all of this. Really, all you're paying for is the compute in Azure, okay? So that means we better manage that compute spend, in a very granular manner. How do you do that? Auto scaling and logic and automatic stuff like that, so that when the users start coming on at 8 a.m., we start scaling out that compute environment. And as they start logging off around 6, we start scaling it back and pilot light it overnight. So you're only paying exactly what you need when you need it. And that's got to be all automated and done with a lot of orchestration. And so we show up with all of that, like IP and software overlay, to just manage that for you. And of course, we'll do pools, we'll manage your pools and dedicated machines and tech support and backup and recoveries and all the typical IT stuff you'd expect from us as Red River. We're probably doing for you in many other parts of your environment today. Okay, so think about it like this. You call up and you say, hey, we got to get going on this. All we really need from you guys is from the client is to help us with the application stack, the application catalog that we're going to be rolling out, kind of by image type. So the finance image, the sales image, the warehouse image, get those apps right. We test them collectively together, get them patched right, and then we deploy and we handle it from there. Okay. All right. So now we're going to move on to the devices piece of this. So remember, securing access, securing devices, and securing data. Those are the three big themes. So when we think about device management, mobile device management specifically, okay, what is a mobile device, first of all? Well, it's a Windows 10 machine, it's an iOS machine, it's an Android machine, it's a Mac, okay, like it's everything, right? So we're going to talk more specifically about Android and iOS and those environments, because that's what we worry a little bit more about in this BYOD world, okay? So we have to think about two things: the device itself and then the applications that we're serving up on that device, because here's what we don't want. We don't want anybody to take any old iPad that they've got or Android device, go to the App Store, download any old version of Outlook or OneDrive, and log in with their Office 365 creds and start using that data, okay? Why don't we want that? Well, because one, that device itself could be compromised, right? It could be jailbroken. It might be on a 10-year-old version of iOS or something, right? So we want to enforce some minimums in that environment. Now, we don't care at all about what else is on that. We're not going to see anybody's Facebook or any of that type of thing, all right? We're just worried about, is this device meet our minimum standards to deploy the corporate applications that we care about, okay? Has it been jailbroken? We want to check those types of things. And then sometimes we can even, in certain applications, restrict camera and mic use and things like that, all right? So once we're satisfied that the device has like some sort of minimum level of hygiene, okay, we can start deploying the applications. Again, this is not, we don't want the user to be able to go and just download anything. We're gonna give them an application catalog, okay, that's got the right versions of the right apps, and then we're gonna be able to enforce the corporate policies that will make sure that we're comfortable that the data that resides or that's being served up through that device is secure. So some examples of that are, we're going to make sure that if it's stored on that device, it's encrypted, right? We're going to maybe control copy paste restrictions. So things like, do we want to allow users to copy out of OneDrive into Dropbox, okay? Or any other cloud sharing file device, okay? Of course, we want to be able to do device wipe and things when if somebody loses their device, okay? We may even want to just have them use a secure browser if they're looking at corporate websites, all right? And then another example I like to use is because a lot of that stuff seems like table stakes, but I come back to I have 3 kids, and my youngest is that 11-year-old boy, and I mentioned we play baseball, and so he plays baseball, and we travel up and down to different tournaments and things, and he likes to play Fortnite because he's an 11-year-old boy. So I hand him my iPad, okay, that's got the Fortnite app on it. but it's also got all my corporate stuff on there, my OneDrive, my Teams, my Outlook, and I want to make sure that he doesn't accidentally trip it into one of those applications and delete something or whatever. So our corporate policy is set up so in order to open one of those apps, you got to give it a thumbprint or a code or whatever. So I can now hand my son that iPad. He can play Fortnite on it, and we can make sure that he's not going to accidentally mess up my my work stuff. Okay, so a whole host of reasons at the end of the day why we do these things. All right. All right, so securing access, securing devices, and the third leg of this thing is securing data. Okay, so we're going to go through a handful of subjects here. All right, the first is just kind of basic anti-malware protection. All right, so for those of you who've been following us, or if you're a client, you probably have our Cloud Assist Security Foundations implemented. That'll be a separate webinar, but that's a whole anti-malware framework that we have that does everything from security awareness training, next-gen firewall, next-gen endpoint protection. It's more than just this. Today's talk is really around what can we do in the cloud to enable remote workforce. So aside from Cloud Assist Security Foundations, what we can do is in the Office 365 world is turn on something called Advanced Threat Protection. People call it ATP, and really it does a lot of things, but at the end of the day, what we're really trying to protect against is the anti-malware, the malware and ransomware that comes in, right? If there's one, kind of big rock that we worry about every day, it's that, right? So at the end of the day, of course, it's going to scan for phishing and those things, but safe links and safe attachments are something you might not even realize are available in your tenant today. Okay, so what does that mean? So somebody sends me an email with a link in it or an attachment. What we can configure the tenant to do is actually, before I deliver that email is delivered to me, we're going to take it over in a safe sandbox, detonate that link or that attachment, and make sure that it's safe. Okay, that it's not trying to deploy malware. And if it is, okay, we quarantine it. If not, we send the mail through. So simple little step to do. Sounds simple, not quite so simple to implement, but definitely good part of a cyber posture in the cloud, in any environment, remote work or not. Okay, data loss prevention. Okay, so this is something that's been a big scary topic for people for a long time, but it's now just part of everyday conversation, whether it's been because of compliance issues that have been thrust upon businesses or this remote work situation we're in right now. Okay, whole host of reasons that we need to worry about DLP or data loss prevention. So what is this? All right, so it's one thing to worry about like a maligned user or a malicious user downloading corporate secrets and doing something bad with them. Okay, that's like the exception. What we're really worried about here is folks like unwittingly doing something that violates one of our compliance issues, like accidentally sending out something that has banking information or personal health information or something like that. Okay, so we want to just protect our users from themselves in like an easy to understand way. So if they accidentally try to paste something into Teams that has a bunch of banking information or send out an email that's got personal health information in it or something along those lines, we're going to just stop, let them know, hey, this looks like something that's a red flag. If you think you really want to send this, click here. We'll have IT take a look at it and either release it or give you a call. Okay, and this stuff integrates with all the traditional, the information protection strategy that we've been rolling out for a little while now. So how does this work? Okay, well, it's really about it's really kind of like about just classifying and labeling every aspect of the data that's in the environment. So there's automated discovery techniques. I'm not going to go into all of that, but bottom line is we look at every Word document, every PowerPoint, every Adobe PDF, whatever it is, okay, and we're going to classify it and label it. Okay, so there's a whole host of canned classifications for compliance that we can turn on: GDPR, HIPAA, SOX, 800-171, all of those things. Okay, so those will be in the can and can label. And then you could also do things like label for sensitivity. So let's say it's finance department only, executive only, internal only, whatever. You don't want it emailed out. You want it encrypted. There's all kinds of things you can do with those types of labels. Okay, so think classify the document, label it, and then we can label it for sensitivity, compliance, or retention, okay? And then from there, it's just about policy enforcement. So we set the policies up. Hey, if it's GDPR, don't let it go out via email, okay? Store it encrypted, right? Things like that. If it needs to be destroyed after 7 years, make sure it's destroyed after 7 years. All of that stuff now just happens automatically. And odds are, again, if you're an M365 customer, you probably own everything that we need to help you do this. And it's a heck of a lot less complicated than it used to be. All right, you can see here on this slide, you know, we can scope it to just a certain group of users. Like there's a .org that we support that has one of their grants has HIPAA information in it. So we created a Teams channel and Teams site just for that grant and enabled all this DLP just for the users in that team doing that grant. Okay, so it doesn't have to be something that's like, you know, organization wide. It can be that specific. If you have a tactical issue, we can do things like that. Just something that comes to mind. Okay. All right, Gary. So we've talked about securing access, securing devices, and then securing our data. And we could talk. By the way, each one of these could be a separate 1 hour presentation. Okay. I'm going to move now into the last piece of the data protection, or this. It's a little unrelated, but it is related in the fact that I've been getting a lot of calls about it, and that's business continuity strategy.
Right.
Okay. Right. So you know, there's 3 pieces to business continuity: backup, high availability, and DR. Right. Most folks have backup and high availability. Okay. If you don't have backups, like, you know, that's on you, right? Everybody knows you need to have backups. Okay. And not all backups are created the same, but of course, you know, we have a lot of different ways of doing backups. High availability, if you're in a VMware cluster or Hyper-V cluster or in Amazon or Azure or GCP, you've probably very likely got high availability, okay? So those 2 things are check the box for most clients, okay? It's DR that's been the real, you know, heavy lift for a lot of clients historically, okay? And why is that? Well, there's 3 big reasons. Cost being, you know, at the top of the list, because to do this in a non-hyperscale cloud way, okay, what we would do for clients is we would literally build a second data center and do SAN-to-SAN replication. So what does that mean? Well, I'm paying for my production data center. I got to go out of geography for a second rack in a second data center somewhere. That's a monthly recurring expense. I got to have expensive telecom between those things. I got to implement a second stack of hardware and manage that, okay? All of those things have cost and complexity. And now that I've got a second data center, is that thing compliant in the same way my first? So I have all my compliance stuff I got to deal with. So it's not to say that customers haven't been doing this. They have. We've been doing it for years. SAN-to-SAN replication with VMware SRM, Zerto, Veeam, you name it. Okay, this is not like this field's been plowed a million times. Okay, but it's complex and costly. All right. So those barriers have kind of disappeared now with this new service where we've rolled out around Azure Site Recovery. So we have a managed Azure Site Recovery, managed DR in the cloud, and it really brings this to the masses, okay? Why is that? All right, well, one, because we're using Azure, it takes a lot of that cost problem out of the picture. You're paying $25 a workload for replication plus like 4 cents a gig or something for storage. Okay, so it is a rounding error in most IT budgets to do this, as opposed to a full second data center, a second set of equipment, managing all that. Right? This is you just pay for the replication and the storage, and you only pay for the compute when you use it. Okay, and you're only going to use it when you're doing your test bubbles, which might be once or twice a year, or when you actually have a DR activation. Okay, so that's 1. 2, it's obviously less complex because I'm not managing a second storage array. I'm not managing a second VMware cluster or Hyper-V cluster or whatever. Okay, I'm not managing. There's second sets of telecom services and the whole bit. Okay, from an orchestration and runbook perspective, that all is like for like, right? We're going to have the same set of concerns because you want to have reboot orders in the right order and DNS changes and all of that. But that's all part of the program. Okay, and then finally, we've talked about this throughout the presentation. Like, it's widely accepted that it's easier, it's more secure, and more compliant to be with AWS, Azure, GCP than it is to do it yourself. Okay, so what does this thing look like? Just as a quick, like illustration, this Gary right here, we just got like a simple like web workloads, so sitting on VMware, so VMware, SQL underneath it, PHP app, front ended by Apache. Okay, so we would come in with this workload and deploy our managed business continuity solution to Azure. We would replicate these workloads to Azure. Okay, configure that replication, get them up there, and then if there was a really bad day, what happens is the runbook kicks in. Okay, the users, all the DNS stuff happens. Okay, the reboot order is right. So maybe AD comes up, then SQL, then PHP, then Apache, and those users are now redirected to Azure, and off we go. Okay, so it's a matter of minutes for all this to happen, and we didn't have any of the complexity that we did before. Okay, so this is becoming a very popular subject with our clients right now. Okay, let's see. Okay, so finally, now that we've got the highway built, okay, we got the roads built, and we're comfortable that our users are having a secure, consistent remote access experience. Okay, how do we make them highly productive? Okay, well, that really, Microsoft Teams. If you've been watching, I was just before this, Slack CEO was on CNBC and talking about how hard Teams is hitting them, right? So if you look at this slide right here, in November, Microsoft had 20 million daily active users of Teams. Since COVID, that is more than doubled. Okay, so this is like no joke. This is how people are communicating now in this environment. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Teams, all right, just quick little, what is Teams? It really is the central hub for all things productivity related in the M365 suite. Okay, I know for me, on my desktop, I have Teams open, an Outlook open, and a web browser, and that's pretty much what I need to work. Okay, and I think that's really the modern desktop experience, right? Teams, Outlook, and a web browser. So if you think about at its core, Teams is three things. It's collaboration, meeting, and callings. Okay, so we'll go through each one of these. So Collab, right? Collab is your traditional desktop collaboration applications. It's chat, it's enterprise chat, persistent chat, right? Presence, all of those things. File sharing. I haven't gone to a formal SharePoint site collection in a long time. Every time I need a file, it's always in Teams somewhere. It's just easier. It makes more sense. It's a more logical way to store documents, and obviously easier for IT to secure that way. Okay. Teams themselves, if you're not familiar with them, think about, like, you probably have email distribution groups that have 50 people on them that pollute your inbox every day, but they're they're just part of how you work because it's how it is, right? Well, those are great candidates to become teams. So think like, let's just say you have a finance team and you have accounts payable and accounts receivable. Well, those accounts payable would be a channel, accounts receivable would be a channel. You can store your aging reports there. You have your persistent chat. You can @mention people. So it's a very efficient way to communicate, and it significantly declutters your inbox. My internal email has gone down over 50% since we deployed Teams 2 years ago. Okay. Meetings, we're in a Teams live event right now. Teams meetings it's WebEx, GoToMeeting. It's at least as good as that experience. It's a really high quality video experience, and there's a lot of innovation coming out every day. They just announced 3x3 video, which is going to be coming soon, so that'll be more like a Zoom-like feeling. Okay, you can do things like blur your background, have special backgrounds, and there's a whiteboard feature in here that's pretty cool. Okay, so of course it integrates with Microsoft Outlook and any calendaring application, and it also integrates with third-party video conferencing. So like if you're like us and you have a big investment in Cisco. High-end Cisco video conferencing equipment in your room systems, you want to be able to integrate with Teams meetings as those come about. We can do all of that. Okay. Another neat thing that's coming soon. This is if you're not familiar with it, you might not realize exactly how powerful this is. But center of table devices, okay, for video conferencing or room systems, let's say, okay, they're generally set up to use one service. I've got my Cisco device. I've got my Zoom room, my Teams room, and I can't join a WebEx from a Zoom device, for example, okay? Well, Microsoft is solving that. Very soon they're going to release direct guest join, which means you're going to be able to join a Teams meeting, a Zoom meeting, or a WebEx meeting from the same Teams interface, and it's just a software upgrade to what's already there. This is huge. This is powerful. This democratizes video conferencing for the small to mid-sized conference room, because we can now light those things up for $2,000 or $3,000 and have a full, enterprise class video experience across all the major platforms. This is a big deal. Okay. The whiteboarding experience is pretty cool. If you haven't seen it, it's a really neat piece of the puzzle here that Microsoft delivers. And then finally, this thing's a phone system if you want it to be. Okay, so you can connect it to your existing phone system and your existing dial tone, or Microsoft themselves is a CLEC, so we can use their PSTN. You can port your numbers to their PSTN. So at the end of the day, you grab a headset, a speaker puck, or there are Polycom makes phones for this thing, and off you go. It's now your phone system. So this is can become your single client for calling, meetings, and collaboration. Okay, like I said, for me, that's how I use it, and so that's why I have Outlook and Teams on my desk with a web browser, and that's pretty much what I need to work. All right. So in closing here, guys, I want to just wrap it up with a couple of things. You heard me in the Deco story talk about, and for those of you who've been following us at Red River for a while, you've probably seen this slide. We add to it and remove from it, okay? But really, we've been advising our clients down this digital transformation journey for a few years now, okay? And like I say, it evolves as technology evolves and things. But this strategy right here is what Deco sort of asked us to help them with a couple years ago, and along with hundreds of other customers, okay? And so what you'll see here is, yes, today's about remote workforce, okay? But really the pieces we've talked about today here highlighted are just piece parts of a broader digital transformation strategy. So we didn't set out with Deco or the other many customers that we've done this for to build a remote workforce strategy. We set out to really reflect, build an IT infrastructure that reflects how modern workers behave, okay? Modern workers have multitude of devices. Modern workers work from anywhere, okay? From the soccer field, from a convention in Vegas, hopefully if we ever do those again, from an airplane, okay? Or in the office behind a corporate firewall, right? So we have to make that IT available, and so that's really what you see. There's a lot of other stuff to this, okay? That's more broad, but the remote work component of that is just part of this strategy, okay? And then I'll close with this. If you're not familiar with this program called FastTrack that Microsoft has, Red River is part of a select group of FastTrack, what are called FastTrack Ready partners. And what that means, so there's about 75 of us FastTrack Ready partners, okay? And for those of you that are in the audience that are public sector customers, there's only 6 public sector FastTrack customers. We are partners, we are one of those. What that means is, if you have 150 entitlements or more, meaning like 150 Microsoft 365 licenses or greater, okay, it is very likely that we can secure FastTrack funding to help you adopt and onboard much of the technology that we've talked about today. So it's not going to pay for the entire migration and all of that, but it's going to take a good dent out of some of these projects. Okay, this is funding that is readily available to you from Microsoft through us to come do this work for you. So you might look at this and say, geez, this could be a big consulting engagement. It might be, but a lot of it might get paid for through FastTrack funds. Okay, so I'll close there and just we can take some questions. I've got Brian Charles on the line to help with any technicals. Gary Utley's contact information here is on the slide. You can hit him directly for follow-ups, but Gary, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, Jason, thank you so much. That was a plethora of great information for getting people ready, not only to get them the remote, but get them to modernize their workforce and really kind of adapt to the new way of people working. I think it was a lot of information that was great. We have a lot of questions coming over here to the right. Brian was able to answer them, but I'm going to kind of repeat them. So either Jason, you can jump in, or Brian, you're more than welcome to take the answer. So first question comes from Victor. If I create and assign a configuration profile in iTunes or Intune MDM for Mac OS, Will that profile also affect Windows machines or just Mac OS devices?
So the policies that you configure in Intune are specific to the device profile that you're looking for. So you have the ability to set a different profile for Mac OS as you would Windows 10, as you would iOS and Android. So you have all that flexibility to configure what your organization needs.
Okay, great. Next question. With MDM users don't like it as we have the power to wipe the devices. So do they have the power to wipe that?
Yes, and
Okay.
when you are getting into a mobile device manager, that's always the question that comes up. Users just don't like that capability for IT to kind of see what they're doing, or Big Brother's kind of looking around. But one of the interesting things about that, if you're using ActiveSync, which is what the native mail apps for a lot of these things utilize, IT administrators already have the ability to wipe your work devices if you're connected to Exchange Online or even Exchange On-Prem, I think as early as 2007. What MDM is doing is giving us additional capabilities so that I can selectively wipe. So I'm able to go to the device, pull back just corporate data, and leave my family photos from my vacations and stuff alone.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that I think they were looking to be more secure. The next question that comes with it is, what privacy do users still have on their personal devices with MDM?
Yep, great question. During the enrollment process into Intune, there's a nice graphic that comes up that shows you exactly what your IT admins can see and then what they cannot. So they're not going to be able to see your call and web history, location, email, text messages, contacts, passwords, your camera roll, and your calendar. All that stuff remains private. They're going to be able to see things like the model of it, the name of it, the serial number, and so some of that management capability stuff that they would need to be able to make sure that that is you.
Okay, great. Now we're going to shift it a little bit to the teams. Group conversations can be tough since Teams only allows 4 screens at a time. Is this going to change?
Yes. It is
Okay.
going to change, and Jason mentioned it a little bit earlier in the presentation. As early as last night, we got new information on this. So last week, Microsoft put out on the Twitter, "Hey, 3x3 is coming, so you'll be able to see 9 people." Last night, they released an announcement saying that it is now being rolled out to the public over the next 2 weeks. So look forward to seeing that joining your tenant soon.
Oh, great! So we get to see more people, right?
Yeah.
Good. Another question is coming for around Teams. Is our organization uses G Suite instead of Exchange and Outlook? Can Teams integrate with Google Calendar or for conferencing?
So I was looking around on this one. I'm not aware of any native integration between Google Calendar and Microsoft Teams. I've seen some third parties, but I don't know enough about them to recommend anything. So if you're in G Suite right now and you want to take advantage of Microsoft Teams, I would start to look at what integrations might work for your organization, and then ask if you are going to start migrating towards the Microsoft platform as a whole, because there's so many things inside of the Office 365 suite that your entire organization will be able to look forward to. So the question is, why are you using half of it here and half of it there? So there's additional information that I would need to know to make a recommendation one way or another.
All right, appreciate that. All right, so that kind of wraps up the questions that we have today. Once again, Jason, Brian, thank you so much for your time and kind of giving a better explanation of how people can kind of get to a remote modern workforce in an era such as this. So like Jason said, if you have any questions, or feel free to contact us, contact me in my email at gary.utley@redriver.com. And as well as this presentation as being recorded, we'll be sending it out to all the people who attended and RSVP'd as well. So you always have this information in front of you. Thank you again for joining us. And Jason and Brian, thank you again as well.